Let's try this again. The big opening against Russia, right? Real bloody. First impulse, Axis. Japan kind of asked for that because they had a little permutation over here in Chongqing, which they managed to take. They threw all their bombers in with their one fighter covering it. The Chinese only threw 2 fighters to cover. A heavy bomber fleet is going to get partially through against not enough fighter cover, and that's what we saw here. They actually shot down the Japanese fighter, but had trouble with the long line of bombers they had to face because of the bonuses that you get for having units backing you up. The Japanese ended up taking Chongqing. They had like a 6-to-1 assault table attack. They probably shouldn't have gone that high. If they had left a couple of units out, they wouldn't have all gotten flipped. Bad roll. Bad roll is the name of the day this turn, this impulse. The German assaults here, I thought, geez, the mountain's tough. I couldn't even attack this unit, but I attacked this one. Boom! Bad roll. Again, on that, 5-to-1 table there. Up here also, this was actually a blitz that failed, and this was an assault that failed. Both at fairly high odds, not tremendous odds, but again, bad rolls. Boom. This is a surprise turn when the Russians can't even fly air support. Of course, the only real air support they have for the most part is that they can fly fighters to shoot down the German planes. They do have one bomber assigned up here, but I don't know how much help that's going to be. The Germans used one of their fighters as a bomber. The bonus on surprise, there's a few of them. One is they get across the rivers without a penalty, but the big one is that the planes get 2 rolls instead of 1 on their ground strikes, so that's kind of potent. I even used some planes to up the odds so that I had a good shot going in, to no avail. Now, what I'm not playing with is I'm not playing with reactive entry, which means Bulgaria is not going to come in the war. The big reason for that is, although I'm beginning to see why it makes, why I would want to play with that option actually, I can't reverse my decision from before, because if Turkey comes in, boom, they come sliding into Russia for free. If Poland comes in, so I've got to give the Russians a chance to defend their big open areas. They have no reason to trust those countries. If I was redoing the game, or if I could have looked into the future and seen what the effects of not having that are, I probably would have gone ahead and used that option. The main reason is, waiting 2 months to join in a war, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, the Germans probably couldn't use the reactive entry for their own allies for the simple fact that they already owe an option. Although, you can, this isn't clarified in the rules, but what is clarified in the rules is you can make a reactive declaration of war even if you owe a reactive declaration of war. But you can't do it if you owe an election, which to me seems kind of goofy. I think, but the reactive alignment is optional. The reactive declaration of war is required. So anyway, we did not get far at all. And the mountains are tough terrain. But up here, I should have been busting through. This was kind of the Russians left very little and not a very good defensive line, actually, leaving this guy out in the open, which was kind of a mistake. But we stopped them, and now it's time to consider, the possibility of counterattacks. I got to look to see if I have a headquarters. I may be able to recuperate some of those units, because some of them are at risk where they are. Same down here. And same over with the Japanese. Okay, well, the Germans are paying for their flipped units with a number of them destroyed by what are really Russian attritional counterattacks. They're not trying to gain land here, they're just trying to kill things. There were a couple shatter results. Those allowed a couple of the units to survive, but if we look over here, we see the dead pools beginning to increase on the German side. That's this turns. And it worked also with the nationalist Chinese launching an attack here, and you can see they ran around and grabbed this resource, which is the only thing important to Japan. China would like to get the factory too, but I think the resource is the more important piece of equipment. Actually, yeah, it is. And what I was going to say is if China got its factories producing better, the U.S. could just send resources instead of finished goods. But currently, their production at 1/4 there, that's not moving anywhere. Of course, if we could get some money into there, that would help. But yeah, Japan's staying within the limited war restrictions, but they lost a couple of units in this space as well. And again, the Chinese nationalists only nationalists didn't move in there. The red units were communist, but now they've been replaced. So on to the next impulse. Again, this Russian front is almost guaranteed to collapse, and things look very bad for Russia overall. This front, I'm not so sure, because it's got some significant strength to it and some terrain advantages. But you can see Germans starting to creep through and dislodge it, get this plane to move out of there, and just weaken that line as a whole. So they're not going to hold this either, but they've got a lot of room to fall back. Here, the terrain just isn't that good. I mean, forests are nice, but they're not great. Weather for this next one, the only rain is going to be down here in the southern monsoon, or in the northern monsoon, so it's not going to affect much of what's going on. People like tough choices in games. I'm not sure how I feel about them. Sometimes I really hate them. Here, they don't bug me too much. For example, though, I had this one choice where I only have one German fighter available. But I have more coming in slowly. Eventually, I will run the Russians out of fighters. One of my choices is, where do I send my bombers and the one fighter? And I've decided to send one fighter, one bomber to this hex, which has a flipped unit already in it, and an unflipped unit. And if I can flip the unflipped unit, I reduce it down to, I guess, 4 strength points, which is an 8 in the mountains. I don't know if I can really attack that terribly well, but it was within range of my fighter, so it's what I'm going for. It might end up being abandoned later. I might not even attack it. But the Russians have decided, they had a tough choice too, to throw, they can't. Their fighter was back here. It's too far away. They could throw this fighter in to defend. I'm going to leave this alone. I think this is an unimportant fight, and I'm burning a German fighter. Not dead, but its activity is used up. I think there's still a headquarters that's alive down here, though. So there's a possibility for the Germans to recuperate a couple of units, and they might well recuperate their fighters, because those were in short supply. Depends on how quickly they can run out the Rusky fighters. If they can run them all out, then their bombers have free range. Now, they don't have a whole hell of a lot of bombers either, which is why it's a hard balancing act. Anyway, let's see, we're hitting in there for, we got kind of rainy weather, so we're not doing any ground strikes up here. They'll be at reduced odds if we did. Yeah, we got a hit, so we'll get to see if I can get enough strength to make that attack make sense. Right now, it's against an 8, which is a pretty powerful defensive line, and I've got a bunch of flipped units here, so I really can't get a whole hell of a lot up against. A little bit of playing with the mechanisms of the game. The Allies ended the turn by making a pass after the Axis turn, in order to save Russia from further humiliation, perhaps. What it did was it cost the Soviets their turn, but I didn't feel like that's that big a deal because they're still in a pretty good defensive line. It didn't really cost the nationalists anything. They're kind of stalemated, although the Japanese are pulling so many forces into China now. The 41 force pool is coming into play. They've got more and more troops coming in. They may just be able to win it. Hope springs eternal here. But by making the pass, they weren't really costing themselves anything. They gave the Soviets a bonus in the initiative for next turn and for potentially ever, which it doesn't affect the political initiative, which would be much more important, but in terms of the military initiative, might give them some advantages overall. What we're looking at is we'd like the Soviets to slow down the Axis a great deal. We don't really, there's no real, Damocles sword hanging over your head as the Allies in WIF in terms of, oh wow, well, Russia might fall. So for example, I know in unconditional surrender, Russia fell. That was a bad thing. And I kind of said, geez, that may not have been the best, move, but there isn't much you can do about it because of the nature of East first versus West first. You get that choice at the beginning. In other games, where Russia can fall, you don't want it to happen. Well, you don't want it to happen here either, but it isn't going to happen. Not unless Russia makes some sort of political deal to allow a Vichy surrender or a negotiated surrender. And I don't know how likely that is. We'll see. It's a wide open game in so many ways with the days of decision. And in fact, World in Flames allows you to negotiate surrenders too, but there's a lot less reason for it because that's a bipolar game. You are Axis or you are Allies. Here you're the Western Allies, Russia, or the Axis powers, and you have competitions within those. So it's kind of like this really cool dynamic is in place. How well it actually plays out, I'm not sure. So far, we've seen Germany and Italy kind of squabbling and cutting deals over the miners, and that's about the extent of any kind of not helping each other terribly much. Japan has been in their own little world, but they're trying to rush to victory there. Anyway, this is really the Chinese frontier is pretty close to the same as it was. Over here, you can see the Germans made some headway, as did they over here. They cleared Lithuania. Ooh! But the big danger is the miners can come in now. We've got Italians streaming up through Turkey. And the Turkish army itself can come in. Of course, on the Soviet side, they've got Bulgaria as a possibility. And depending on what happens, perhaps other countries. So it becomes very important who gets to trigger the IPO5, the call-in miners, in terms of, it would kind of suck as Russia to have Bulgaria left behind. Although maybe not, in the sense that they become this pocket of annoyance back there if they enter the war after the Russian line's been moved on. But I would much rather have a contiguous line. The question is it worth spending a lot on a bid, or do you just take your chances with sort of the minimal bid that might work? Or do you pass entirely? And there's a lot of countries that are dangerous here. So, probably the most powerful is Italy bringing Turkey in. And Iraq's not too impressive. But Germany can bring Hungary, Sweden, and Finland in. And the three of those might be more impressive than Turkey coming in, especially since there's already an Italian threat moving its way forward. If I had thought that the turn was going to end so quickly, I might have railed some of my Italians up here to present an absolute threat to Russia as it stands. We're probably going to see some Russian troops built down here, but not a whole hell of a lot. We got more Russian force pool, more German force pool, more Italian. All the reserves come into play. But the important thing is the Russians also have a huge pile of Germany-only reinforcements. I don't know what that's supposed to reflect, an existential fear of a German invasion, I guess, but, after World War I or whatever. But they gear up a lot more units against Germany than they would against any other enemy. So the U.S. and Britain could come storming through Poland somehow, or through Finland or something, and attack the Soviet Union in huge quantities, coming in perhaps from the Pacific as well, and they will not get those reinforcements. But They get them as long as they're fighting against Germany. I don't know if those dissolve if you go to kind of a total war type game, you know, a Patton in Flames scenario. And we might. I don't know what I feel like. You know, it depends on how much the players are pissed at each other or whatever. How much I feel like continuing playing if we get that far. Anyway, we got some fairly heavy oil expenditures. This is going to be a pain for Germany. Although, as you can see, their synthetic oil plants are going to be helping things, but they're still running right up near their production limit. And it's not like they've regained those Romanian oil fields that they'd really like to get. Likewise, the Japanese have a little bit of oil expenditure. But the big one's the German. The Russians, you know, they have this pile. They're not going to run through that all game. As soon as Germany actually enters Russia itself, I can start railing factories out of the way, which is of some value. The thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't prevent, so in some games you can rail factories away and it prevents the Germans from using the factories. Here, the red factories are the only ones the Germans can use, these smokestacks that are kind of redder than others, and they're surrounded by a red thing. But you can see there's a red factory and a blue factory here. I can ship the blue factory out. But the Germans can't use that anyway, so, you know, I can't deprive them of production, but I can get some of my own production out of the way that won't get, you know, destroyed. It takes a couple of turns to recover, though, so, you know, if I thought I could just deflect this German blow, I would do it, but I really don't think I can. And as we enter July, political actions were a little less impressive than I thought they would be. Problem is this. Russia had a huge bid preset because they did a pass last time. They got a good position, they got a pass off, so they had +8 on their bid. That means that other people would have to have put a similar bid. Italy went first. They were sitting at a +4, so they would have had to put like a 5 bid in just to tie what Russia's likely to get with a 1 bid. So that would mean a 6 bid. That's a lot of money for Turkey. Turkey's all it would have been too. Although now it's Hungary too, but we'll talk about that. Well, Iraq, I could have brought Iraq in. That's not really worthwhile. The only reason to bring Iraq in is if I'm at war with the Commonwealth, I guess. So I probably don't want to do that because I got to pay the card for each time that I trigger it. And, you know, it's a $5 play. So it doesn't matter what country you're bringing in, how big, how powerful. So, yeah, Iraq seemed unlikely. So I'd be bringing just Turkey in. Now, Turkey's potent and would really have been able to affect Russia, but I could bring them in next time. And it turns out I'll be bringing in Hungary too, probably. Germany couldn't bring anyone in because they went to war last turn. They owe a war, so they got to play that this time. No one else, you know, is involved in that bidding. So basically, Germany had to put a bid in. They put their 1 bid in for the declaration of war. Russia put their 1 bid in because they had so many. Britain put a bid in to gear up, and they're up to 1 times now. The U.S. would love to gear up, but I screwed up again. I'm at like negative $19. I just can't seem to get my money where I need it. That's actually $1 short of what I need because it's $12 to gear up. But, you know, I'm not willing to cut them any slack for whatever reason. Yeah, they're the U.S. Whatever. Okay. So, Bulgaria enters the war. And Bulgaria is not very impressive. It's just this. I mean, honestly, having them enter probably weakens the Russian position more than it aids it. But I didn't find that out till I pulled out their troops. And boy, do they suck. I hope they have them all. That's a reserve. I'm sure they do. But it's just really pathetic how weak they are. Hungary's not much better, but a little bit. Romania had a somewhat larger army. But again, nothing that can stand up to the kind of punishments that's going to be going on here. The real problem is the Bulgarian terrain that's just been added to the situation. But whatever, we probably weren't going to hold this line forever anyway. Oops. Okay. triggering, yeah, the Russians pulled a little tricky trick over in Hungary. I haven't pulled the British trigger yet. I gotta figure out what that's gonna be. But the Russians pulled a little trick in Hungary and moved it from being German to being Italian by triggering the German actions first. Italy had a bunch of points built up. We have some interesting stuff going on here in Turkey. Not enough that I can budget, is there? See, I've only got a -2 on the German marker there. It's going to take like a -4 to bump Turkey off of Italy. And nobody else has anything except Italy, which has a 2, which would in fact work, but if they didn't have control of it. So I don't know what Britain's going to do. They would really love to get some movement going in Spain, but it's not enough to do anything, I don't think. Well, it is. The Spanish Republic is actually on top of the U.S., so we don't need to move that. So yeah, I don't know what I'm going to trigger. Probably something goofy to try to kill some points or something. Another possibility is to trigger up here at Finland. I can turn that into a pro-Italian state. But then that just puts all the miners into Italy's camp. And Germany has no real reason. Well, they got Sweden. Sweden's pretty big. Maybe it's worse than that. Finland can't be aligned with Italy. In fact, Poland can't either. So Hungary is allowed to be. Turkey obviously is. Italy is sort of this neutered power due to these limitations here. And Poland, Finland, neither one's on here. So we're not going to see those miners come in. I triggered Finland and put it on top of the Italians, and now it's not going to enter the war until, you know, some kind of extra power is built up there. And that kind of neuters not entirely the Swedes, because they have to kind of channel through. I was really counting on opening up the front up here in the north. Obviously the front in the south is going to open up, but with Bulgaria swinging, maybe that's a little different. But wow. And if Germany attacks Poland, which is appealing in the sense of, wow, nice direct route across, and even more than that, how the hell am I going to supply my Germans, right? I can supply them out of Königsberg and up here along the rail lines and to the cities and such not, but for the most part it's along the rail lines that you're driving your supply, with little branches off from cities and from headquarters. And I can do the same to the south, but there's this big gap in the middle that's going to be hard to cope with. And I'm really going to have to like worry a lot more about my advance paths than you normally do in WIF. Yeah, I mean, there's nice tracks going through the Pripets even. So there's a lot of parallel track going through Russia that can get you everywhere. It's not as much as as like Central Europe, where, wow, I'm in supply, you know, but it's really not that big a difficulty normally in Barbarossa. But I'm a little afraid of it right now. There are some gaps in places where you pretty much absolutely have to hit cities. By the way, battleships, boats, all that, they're not the only big oil wasters. Boy, did Germany get hosed. They lost about 1/3 of their oil on one turn, just reproducing, you know, whatever they had stockpiled. Remember, they went through some fallow turns and ate up some of their oil and got themselves down pretty low, but they're kind of worried they won't be able to maintain this offensive. And indeed, the German opening blows pretty much wrecked Bulgaria. It has no army left, just the air force, which is totally useless, really. It opens up a new front. The Germans would have loved to have declared war on Bulgaria, it turns out. It's just really an easier route into Romania that way. Anyway, for whatever that's worth, I should pull the Bulgarian counter off and put it over here. Up here, the rain prevented the Germans from actually making an attack at all. They didn't want to make any risks. But you can see they busted in over here. The Russians are going to have trouble kind of extricating themselves. Right now they've got supply, so they can kind of move. Well, things are underway. The Italians are beginning to make their way to the border. Here in the south, the Russians look like they're getting pocketed in an ugly way, something that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't brought Bulgaria into the war. Oops. In the north, it's not pretty, but there's no fighting really going on. Everybody's just maneuvering right now in both the north and the south. But there was some bad weather, some rain. It just cleared up, and we'll see if we get any breakthroughs there. But this river line here is really presenting some serious problems to the Germans. You know, normally they have Poland, right? Well, now they're having to inch around the Polish border. Yuck. Nothing much happening in Japan, but the U.S. fleet, more of it repositioning into Hawaii, and the British fleet moving itself. It's going to be down in Cape Town, trying to maybe bluff the Japanese into starting this. They're totally unprepared for a war here. I don't know what we're going to do. You know, we want China to fall, but it ain't going to happen. We push forward into the next impulse. We've got, you know, the time express there. One thing I realize about WIF, it feels almost slow motion compared to even some operational games that I have, in terms of how the battles are resolved, etc. You know, the Germans come creeping in, they kind of cut this pocket deeper and harder, but then they attack one space. You know, in your Third Reich or whatever, you'd be making attacks, you know, from every place where you could get kind of numerical advantage. But here you really need a real powerful advantage. Numerical advantage, piece on piece, doesn't work. You need to get the air support in there to flip the pieces or whatever if you're just going to do it in a very simple fashion. If you don't get the success with the airstrikes, then you need something like this space here where, you know, I was able to bring 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces against it. Now this is in the clear, it was a blitz attack and everything, but, and you know, it was successful, but it wasn't even guaranteed to be, I don't think, because flipped units give you the pluses, which make it more easy. But what we're seeing is sort of this enveloping of the Russian line instead of just the disintegration of the line that you see in, say, Third Reich. And I think some of the operational designs don't really show it in this much detail either. This kind of hurried rush, knowing you can't make it, to try to get out. You have supply here so you can slip another hex back, but you're giving up Bucharest then, and this, that, and the other. And likewise over here, just this little crack through here, but that crack is devastating now. Now the Russians have the opportunity, if they want to try to cut it off and break this, because it's very dangerous to them, or they have the opportunity to try to back their way out. The problem with backing their way out is this isn't really, well, Baltic states is home country actually, so this is a supply source to them. I'm a little iffy on that because, hey, it just turned into, you know, part of Russia, but it was really taken quite early before, not long before the war anyhow, and the games usually give them, you know, a regular WIF game would give them home country status for it as well. So, yeah. But if this was not home country, the German advance here is threatening these units, and then they have this hard call of, do I withdraw and flip, or do I stay out of supply and just hope somebody can save me? Which is kind of an interesting choice. Plus, now the airfields are open. These guys aren't going to be able to get out of the way, so in a way, maybe we're hoping, we've got to move, but part of us, maybe the Commonwealth, and well, it's not just the Commonwealth, are willing to take a possible hit in their initiative level, and give me a shot to escape from this. Then again, they might not give a shit about us, you know. But they probably want us to be a credible resistance to the Germans. There's some worry that all of Russia will fall if the Russian army, you know, collapses here. Okay, messy start of September, October 41. Italy went first. They triggered the minor joins in. they're planning on using this for multiple countries. Turkey, certainly. Iraq, maybe. I can't use much of the force for this, but Hungary, almost certainly. And for the first impulse, we guaranteed Turkey and declared them. That means nobody gets to mess with Turkey, and they'll be ready on our first impulse. We won't be allowed to declare another one on the first impulse, but on the second impulse, we'll be able to call Hungary in, and we have to pay more bucks for it. Germany had the next action. They did a minor alliance. That allowed them to pull Finland back into their orbit, and they triggered that. I don't remember what the Italians triggered for their first one. Can't recall. They triggered something. And boy, does Greece hate them. Nobody's picked them up on that, though, because honestly, Greece is already over here in the capitalist domain. It's not going to jump all the way over to the socialists. And so the capitalists don't really want to play it. The socialists don't want to play it. It's not going to jump in their direction. And obviously, with that big -9, the Axis doesn't want to play it either. It's not going to go anywhere. Of course, that might be kind of cool to burn those 9 points, keeping it kind of in that equidistant away. You know, it's about as far away from the fascists as it can be. But we had bigger things to do, I believe. Damned if I can remember what the Italians did, though. And then the U.S. geared up, and they triggered Chile and played with the points from them. Except I moved Mexico instead, which we really didn't want to do. Chile's not that important overall to the situation, but, you know, it's kind of obnoxious to have Western Hemisphere countries threatening us. They might be able to move a force up into Mexico and help the Mexicans if they're called into the war or whatever. So by pushing Chile off the Japanese, that means the Japanese won't be entering them. I don't know how much they would be interested in entering Chile anyway, but that's what we've got. So now the Germans are in this interesting position where next turn, maybe they're probably going to want to try to bring people in because they have Finland and Sweden set up on their alignment. And the Italians may well bring Iraq in just for shits and giggles. I don't know. You know, is it worth 5? I'm already getting the oil from Iraq. The danger, of course, is maybe if these values move a little bit more, Iraq will come off of us and we won't be getting the oil from there anymore. So there's always kind of this balance of do you want something to happen or not? Anyway. You know, I think I forgot to trigger anything with Italy. I'm going to trigger Greece just to kill those points. Into the September-October phase, I'm going to show you one of my little frustrations with the rolls without flipping through the roll book, because I tried. Over here, this unit has a little bit of a red number on its air-to-air combat. Now, if I look at my sheets that tell me what all those values mean, they don't tell me that. If I look under air-to-air combat, the only thing that's listed is night fighters. It doesn't seem to be the night fighter icon, which is supposed to be a black circle around it, around the combat value. This may be the night fighter number. I don't know what that red number means, but I'm having real trouble thinking of anything it could mean other than that. I remember, though, vaguely and perhaps falsely, that there was some call out of, oh, if the number's printed in this color, it means that's somewhere in the roll book, but I got no way of finding it. So I'm probably going to play them as night fighters with the special rules for those, which I pretty much am ignoring. Rather, you really don't want to be using night attacks when you're doing tactical bombing. They make sense when you're bombing a city, perhaps. When you really don't want to lose, or if you're facing anti-air fire, which we really don't have any here yet. People could buy it. It's just it's expensive to buy artillery of any type. So yeah, I'm kind of ignoring that, but again, I'm pretty sure it's not what I'm thinking I'm using it as, but I don't see any night fighters yet, so, and I probably will never find out again, you know, because in order to find that piece of information, I really would have to read through all of the air combat rules to see what it possibly means, and I got no idea. I do have a night fighter, and interestingly enough, they're printed in red as well. What may have happened was, remember, I've got kind of a weird set. What may have happened was the little red print had been the night fighters, and they changed to black circles around red. So that's my best guess. And in that case, I might not even find it in the rule book. And here we've got a pocket that formed. There was a Russian unit here, so there's basically no supply route out here. So I'm going to move this one down to create a supply route so things can move out of and be supplied the whole way. This I have to leave in place because it's my moving unit. I move an infantry back here. Now this is done, but it's not out of supply because it can still trace. And now I got to worry, okay, what is my next move? Well, I could shift a couple of units in supply back here, then this unit back here, and then the bottom unit into here. And then I probably want to get this headquarters out. So you can do this little dance to try to save your units. But it's not really sufficient. And these guys are in trouble unless I move them. I better send my convoy out to give them supplies. The Turkish Navy or the Italians could go out and try to harass that convoy. There's 3 points in that convoy. I only needed 1, so I'm just kind of notionally putting it out there. It's not really all out there in case somebody wants to go spend oil to kill it. But outside of that, you know, I live a little bit longer here, but it's looking pretty damn ugly. And we'll see what I can do to save the units back here. They also can do a little dance to get out of there. To see some lousy weather, rain came. The Germans decided, okay, we'll ground our planes. We won't use bombing tactics here. And we'll see what we can do with a blitzkrieg here, actually into this hex, which actually gets us the hex. So we might as well have advance. That'll cause more problems for the Russians. But overall, you know, we held off on our attack on the Yugoslavian partisans that showed up. Overall, things went very poorly for us. We had a failure here. Up here, we chose not to attack. We were at lower odds. Basically, we made a couple 5-to-1 blitz attacks up here with an odds shift against for rain. It worked out to that. And they just, we rolled poorly and ended up in both cases getting flipped. We probably needed around a 4, I think, for a successful attack. One of them should have succeeded. Both were fairly safe. A lot of white-bordered units. Here we used the headquarters of the attack, which is risky and stupid. But we also triggered Rommel, wherever the hell he is, I think under there or something, to recover some of these. So, you know, it's not a total loss, but in terms of what damage we've caused this turn, it's not enough to gain us the kind of ground that we need. Over here on the Turkish front, nothing went, though we did land some more Italian troops. We can ship them through because we have more capacity for Italians inside Turkey. We have 2 headquarters there. We can hold quite a few troops. We probably should get this plane moved up here, but we keep using it in bombing raids. So, I don't know. And then also the rain existed up here in the Japanese or Chinese front. And we did a little strike with a 1-point plane just to see, you know. We're hoping to crack right here, get the resource from it, and begin turning the flank. But we've got a lot of power in place. We might be able to just bust our way through here if clear weather comes, because we started moving some fighters up so we can actually use our bombers. Maybe conduct some air superiority. Right now, China has been kind of given short shrift, in part because I'm paying attention to the convoy points now. Although, conceivably, we could convoy points over to Britain, because we have the alliances there, and let them convoy points to China. It's just, we feel like China has a strong enough border that it's hard for it to be cracked, and they don't really have a lot of offensive capabilities. Like none. And if we can bring, you know, we have some Commonwealth planes and armor in here. If we can bring that to bear through Burma, maybe we can bust our way through in the south, or a landing in Hong Kong threatening Canton, forcing the Japanese to cover that. You know, because at any point we could just declare war. Unfortunately, I'm not sure it's really at any point, because the Commonwealth has no alliance with the Chinese, and they're only at level 2 with the U.S. They've got to get that to level 3. And the U.S. is the one with the alliance to China. They're the ones who could declare war based on that, if they can get their successful war declaration rolling, which I think is pretty likely at this point, but I'm not sure. It may be actually something like 50%, which isn't that hot, to tell you the truth. Commonwealth starts shipping forces here into India and into Burma even. Their intention may well be to attack Siam before Japan can call them into the war. There's no alliance between Japan and Siam. If I take Siam out, that gives me an entryway through French Indochina. Now, I'm not at war with Japan, but by occupying Siam, I clear out a danger to Singapore, and I clear out, I clear open another pathway to threaten Japan itself. Now, how valuable is this? I don't know. In order to make a declaration of war on Siam, because they're not allied with anyone, Britain's going to have to be in the first location in the initiative in the political phase. But I got a shot at that, right? If that's what I really want to do, I got to decide. But it looks like overall it would be a positive thing to do. Over here in Europe, the Russians cannot withdraw from here. Any attempt they do so would flip a unit. Well, maybe it makes sense to do so. I got a white border unit. See, the problem is I'm just not going to be able to get out. I got a white border unit here. Now I'm in supply, so I can pull other units all back a hex, essentially. So this unit would move here, then the headquarters moves back here, staying in supply. We can keep the plane in place, essentially. And essentially by juggling the units, I can ease my way out of that. Up here, I already took care of this. The Russians made an attack up in the forest here. Ended up 3-1, but they had a couple of pluses from flipped units. Regular assault table, but they managed to destroy themselves a couple of good German flipped infantry and strengthen the line here. There's still a plane that's likely to die, but you know, there's always casualties in war, right? Alrighty. Commonwealth managed to get the turn to end, but not before the Axis got another activation, and the Commonwealth got something too. The Axis hit some, there was clear weather everywhere, and the Axis, the Japanese managed to hit a lot of air power and actually do some significant air superiority. There's no rules specific for air superiority, but they forced the Chinese to cover with their fighters and shot down one of the important P-40s here. The Brits beginning to move into Burma more heavily, getting ready for Siam. Movement is so slow on anything but the European map. Over here, you can see the Germans kind of totally surrounded this. They've got this mainly cut off. Russian factories sliding away. But on the negative side, there was there's a headquarters exposed here that the Russians had a chance of getting rid of, and they were kind of, so the problem is, if it was good weather again next impulse, killing that headquarters probably isn't worth it because the Germans would be able to push further. But if either it was lousy weather for the rest of the turn, or if the Russians ended the turn with a success in killing that headquarters, it would have been a worthwhile task. Here's our dead pile. We had a bunch of Turks die in a successful attack up here. But, well, semi-successful, okay. The Italians have actually seized the Tiflis region. They moved into that in part of their activities. Yugoslavia, we didn't make the attack here. Very, very reluctant to make 5-to-1 assaults, which is what that would have been. So, we're on to production. Pretty soon we're in 42 already. I'm terrified. So here's the thing. That Japanese Navy is so huge, and the U.S. Navy is not. I probably can commit more U.S. ships. It's not like oil's a big deal. To get across and make it over to the Pacific. The Commonwealth has a fair-sized Navy out here, but again, it's not much bigger than what the U.S. has committed, and the U.S. actually has another fleet here. So they have quite a bit of striking power. The problem is the Japanese could overwhelm anything that the Allies put out. On the other hand, the Japanese aren't getting the first strike in, so there's possibility of, a reverse Pearl Harbor type situation. If the U.S. declares war and they sail out to the Japanese coast and bombard the Tokyo Naval Yard, wow, that's going to be painful too, except there's tremendous anti-air capability there. One of the problems, with the historic situation in Honolulu is there just isn't that much defense fire. What was sacrificed, though, wasn't that major. Right now, the U.S. has a more impressive fleet. They have their carriers, so they have to have them staged there to make the attack. And likewise, the Commonwealth, I don't know where I'm going to land them. Probably Singapore, but some of them are going to go back to South Africa to grab some more troops and haul them down into the theater. I really feel like we need to start preparing for this war very heavily, and the Japanese aren't really prepared for it at all. And again, neither are the Allies. But if we're not going to engage down here, and Italy hasn't denuded Italy itself. I forgot about this. I'm going to rail this up there, because they would have done that. Anyway, if Italy were stripped bare, the Commonwealth might just swing around and declare war on Italy itself. Of course, they got a problem with that. They don't have a casus belli against Italy. They don't have a casus belli against anyone, actually. That's really the problem, is only the U.S. has one right now. Well, no, we do. We have one from the French. So yes, we could swing into war against Italy or Germany if we wanted at any point. We don't really want to. We like the idea of the Italians and the Germans being tied up in Russia. See what happens there. Give it its time. Russia's not going to fall, we think. They might get in a really hard shape, though. Notably, getting cut off into the Pacific map. And I've seen that happen in this game. So, we'll see. Little updates before I move. Well, I did the production already, but one of them is I forgot to bring Hungary in as the Italians. I didn't want to bring Iraq in, but I wanted to bring Hungary in, so I charged them for that, gave them the political value, which actually ended up being a bonus with Greece. And now the Hungarians are in the war. I don't know how big a help they're going to be. They can only send, half their forces. But I can use those forces to help garrison Yugoslavia, for example, for the Germans. Great. And Germany declared Romania liberated. The advantage of that is I get the fortress. The disadvantage is I get the Romanian troops, for good or ill. You see, I'm getting the oil, and that's huge. I actually produced a surplus of oil this turn, even through, the massive attacks that I'm making, which is pretty potent. So far, I have not used my offensive chit. I really hate using them because they're so fucking expensive. Like, I will never buy one almost. But they have this tremendous advantage. And plus, I probably cheat in ways that allow me to not need them. Not paying attention to pick limitations sometimes as much as I should, perhaps. But anyway, it's really valuable if you've got something you need to blow through. Like you can double all the units within range of a headquarters, or you can double the amount of refreshes that a headquarters can do, and that can allow you to continue your advance further than you would be able to normally. So it can actually be a pretty big deal, but it costs something like 15 production. I don't know if that's still the case, but that was what it was in the older versions of WIF. And I think it's still there. Yeah, 15 production takes 3 turns to build. And, what's this NA? I've got a not applicable for oil needed. Oh, because it doesn't need oil to use, but I believe it costs an oil to build. So in addition to whatever resource cost you're putting into play, you also have to throw an extra oil in for the offensive chip. That's probably not too big a deal. That was in the old game. It was such a minor thing, It was like, yeah, you need an oil somewhere. It's like, oh, great, that didn't do anything. The $15 though is huge. Anyway, the Germans, it's huge. Too much exposure to Trump. The Germans had to reduce their debt quite a bit though, because they're planning on bringing Finland and Sweden into the war, and those actions will cause a pretty serious drain on cash. That's $10 right there. They don't have anyone else right now. It's possible they might bring someone else in, I don't know who, but there are other countries that are kicking around in the general area that might be useful and might end up getting triggered before the German activation, or before the turn, certainly. This game has been badly mauled by my not paying attention to the rules on Poland. The fact that Poland can't be a German ally, can't be a Russian ally, and can't be an Italian ally. Well, shit, man. I should have attacked it. I'd have this broad front pushing forward instead of trying to ooze through everywhere. But I think, given the Turkish situation, we're not in bad shape overall, even if Poland is not going to ally with us pretty much no matter what we do. And we'll probably have to attack them at some stupid point, if we manage to defeat Russia, as it were, Poland becomes a really tasty piece there. It's so much more interesting, though, if you grab it before you go for Russia, just because it opens up this whole border. Russians have pulled a few of their factories out of the way. They've got 3 of them out of the way. They're up here. One of them's under production already. The other 2 will be in production in 42. At the end of 41, a couple of thoughts came to my mind. First one, why do things move so slowly for me in strategic games? And I'm kind of seeing it right now. Because I don't think strategically. Which may seem kind of strange because I love the big strategic games, but I really don't. And that's what gets me messed up in the naval situation. That's what gets me messed up in terms of the political action. So I'm thinking more along the lines of, hey, what opportunistic move can I take right now? And once I play all those out, once I play out all the little gains that I can get, I sit there thinking, okay, is it opportunistically good for me to attack now? And I can almost always come up with an argument why it's not, why I can wait. I don't look at, and because I don't look terribly strategically, I don't look at, I want to make my declaration of war in March or May. It has to be then. So I have to have my ducks in a row by that point. I have to have Poland conquered. I have to have, all my neutrals align or set up so that they can align soon afterwards. That's where I get myself into trouble. And that's why, you're not going to see very good play from me, really on either side. The Germans take forever getting in. The U.S. is sitting here saying, I'm just not ready, man. The other thing is, what about the existence of these Chinese? They've been put under a lot of pressure. The Civil War, Japan grabbed a lot of territory, yet they're still there and still look pretty damn strong. Well, part of this comes down to, and we have no idea, this card, Modernize Army. I noticed one thing in here. In the green print, which is for playing with whiff, add all the white print units basically to the force pool. That is an indication that the white print units aren't in the force pool. Unfortunately, I have not seen anything in the rules, certainly not in the setup, that I remember that being the case. I know the Russians don't start off with their white print units, but I caught that also off of one of these rather than the rule book. And here's the thing, when you're playing World in Flames, they're all already in the setup. So this is a Days of Decision issue. Now, it's possible DoD 3 has it in the setup. I didn't see it. DoD 2 did not. I printed the events out. DoD 3 doesn't mention that in the events as far as I recall. I've looked at that event. I've read over all the events. But that's a hard way to remember things. I'm going to look in the DoD setup. The DoD 3 setup, but I don't think there are instructions of that nature. That's just not the way that, that kind of specificity doesn't show up in anything except World in Flames itself, because World in Flames itself went through so many revisions of people saying, what the fuck do you mean by this? How come this isn't somewhere reasonable? It's still not great, but when a game has gone through 6, 7, 8 editions, it starts seriously, achieving something of a level of effectiveness. Unfortunately, the FE is sort of a big jump trying to integrate everything into one place. So things aren't in the most reasonable places, but like I said, I've never known anybody who played anything earlier than WIF 4. My feeling is those were probably, on the lines of Days of Decision 2. I don't remember DoD 1 being terribly hard, but it was a simpler game. And 7 Ages had a lot of problems, too. Anyway, for what it's worth, DoD 3 setup doesn't seem to include anything. I skimmed it. That's on the computer, so I can't read it. It's even harder for me to read than paper. I could sit back with paper and kind of relax with it. The computer, I just skim things on the computer. I can't read them. I can't concentrate on them. But it says completely different things from what the card implies, which it's hard to tell for me how to react to that. I don't know. Like I said, I've heard DoD 3 included the DoD 2 cards, which is kind of like, okay, what the hell do I do with this? But yeah, its discussion is it allows you to crank in next year's units early, which is an expensive thing to do normally. Anyway, we're just going to keep going with it. I would imagine that China without the white print units would fall every time, because before they get planes, you're going to be able to bomb and take any location, because each unit's only going to be one strength point. So anyway, trying to figure out what the hell each country wants to do. I know what Germany wants to do. I know what Britain and US want to do. The gear up that we're talking about for China, it's 10 points. Without adding white point units, I don't see it as being valuable. With adding them, I see it as being so necessary that China probably would go in the whole 10 points early in the game just to get them out there. Now this is kind of interesting. The DoD 3 rules, which I believe came out after this rulebook did, the final edition rulebook, which of course isn't final, there's a living rulebook. They reference something called research sites for atomic bombs, and maybe it works for V weapons. I'm interested in that because I've got Sweden coming into the game and I want to know, is there some importance to me taking Norway as the Germans? Well, in the rules I have for WIF, no. The US gets atomic bombs as part of their force pool, the Germans get V weapons as part of their force pool. That may seem a little unrealistic, especially in a war that delayed so long, that the US Manhattan Project, started up, I don't know, whenever it did, but I'm not sure how unreasonable it is. The US clearly is on a path towards war, and if they have this information, maybe they're moving towards it. Maybe they can maintain that tension. It's not like the Manhattan Project required a huge popular support, but it might have been seen as something of a boondoggle to be given the amount of money that it was given. Anyway, we'll leave it alone and play with what we have. But obviously my DoD 3 rules talk about these research sites. It says to ignore the research sites in, I think, Africa in flames, which are probably important locations where, in South Africa, for example, where uranium's available. But there's nothing like that on this board. I'm pretty damn sure of it. And there's no way I can conform my DoD 3 rules to these rules. And this leads me to say, well, what the hell? Doesn't that mean that there's a new map even? I mean, what the hell's going on here? And obviously the final edition wasn't too final. It got replaced fairly soon after if DoD 3 has discussions about these things. I don't know. I really don't know. Granted, SFB's Captain's Edition was sold as the Doomsday Edition. That was the thing that, back with the Commander's Rulebook, they said, all these new ideas or big changes, they go in the Doomsday Edition when we fix everything. And there was kind of, the joke with that was it would never actually happen. But eventually the Plasma Boys convinced Amarillo Design Bureau, not to be confused with Australian Design Group, that these changes had to be put in, that the game was fundamentally unbalanced against Plasma. I didn't agree, but that's neither here nor there. And they basically triggered the release of that Doomsday Edition. Now, to me, the final edition sounded pretty damn definitive, right? And something that required a change of the map. Obviously, the map changed for this edition, and then they added something new. I don't know. If I find a list of these and the rules for it, someday I may mark up my map and, add those rules to my game, because WIF is such a mishmash anyway. But we won't be playing with that. We'll just be playing with them in the force pool. We'll play with the option, which is to say those units do get added to the force pool, and I get to play with them, but there's no research here. Now, that's kind of funny. I talked to a guy over at the Expo, Consim World Expo, and he said, and I told him one of my gripes was, there's not really any research. I mean, atomic bomb is the U.S. gets atomic bombs, and that's it. And he didn't contradict me there, but, that's not a sign that, maybe these are rules that don't even exist for all I know. But that's not a sign that that's the case. So quite often I find people will just agree to whatever the hell you're saying, even if it's wrong. Especially if you're viewed as kind of, someone with some level of stature. They don't want to correct you. I hate that because normally I don't have any stature, so I say random things and people correct me all the time. But here, this is my impression from this rule book, and for all I know, he's playing with the same era rule book and isn't aware that there's that difference. Or maybe he was just being nice. I don't want to go off on nice people, but anyway. So I see very little reason to go here into Norway. There's no resources up here. There's a resource here. The problem, of course, is that with all the big negatives that Germany and such have, it might be easy to align Norway to the alliances. There aren't going to be a lot of movement. There's -3 from France, but otherwise everything is going to be a moving away from these. And I don't really want either side to be bringing Norway in. So, but I have to leave a garrison in Sweden anyhow. They're not a special aligned country like Romania can be. So I don't see it as being a big deal. Here in November, December 41, you can see the Germans really carving out a chunk here in Russia. And then here as well. We've pushed kind of far. The Russians fell back to begin with. Now I'm on the Allied turn, and I did some reallocation of convoys, and I'm probably gonna send the shipping, which is over here, back towards Europe. But one of the things that prevents war from that's the Swedes there. One of the things that prevents war from happening. All right, look, there's a fair-sized British force here, but who knows what Italy could do. Is I look at the stacks of Brits. These are aircraft carriers, match up with the aircraft carriers there. We've got significantly less. The U.S. has very few carriers here. We got a couple more over in the U.S. waiting for planes, basically. But if I look at, just the naval capacity that's present in the Pacific, and then I look at the Japanese naval capacity, all these stacks. Now, again, these are carriers, so they're about double the size that you'd count on them being. I say, wow, I can't win, I mean, I can't beat them. The Commonwealth has this interesting possibility of trying to slip through French Indochina that we talked about. But to declare war means opening up the naval aspect, and that means opening a naval battle of some sort or another, which might just be a port attack on Tokyo yards and, trying to do what damage we can to the Japanese Navy. But we look at the balance of power in terms of ships and say, it isn't going to work, The Japanese built all of their stuff from the construction pool. They're working on the repair pool. They've got, this constant flow of ships that's been much heavier than the Allies have managed. And there's always this weird tension in World in Flames, because you're sitting there saying, as the Japanese, are the Americans going to attack soon? Because if they are, we really ought to get the first strike in. That's kind of a given in any World War II game, because that's the driving force for the Japanese, or one of them. The other one, of course, was the oil limitations, which the Dutch East Indies capture gets out of the way. And to whatever degree that I may have misplayed that or anything that may have may be influencing the play here, but the long amount of time that it took the Americans to get their way up to 3/4 production, the Brits to 1, which is where the Japanese are, it feels to me right now that we can outproduce the Japanese. If we wait another year, it's better. As long as China can hold on. Of course, there's the question of Europe. Can Russia hold on? Which is beginning to look more and more iffy. But, if you think about it in terms of the historical advances of first year of invasion, sure, there was Romania, which was a problem. But these are not particularly impressive advances the Germans are making. The Russians look weak, but they can keep cranking out troops, right? We hope. I don't know. They don't have a whole hell of a lot coming in on any given turn. They've been spending it all on their militia, which throws a bunch of crap on the board. But that becomes less and less valuable as you go on. As the Russians lose cities, they can get less and less of their militia. So, whatever. But my feeling right now is that we kind of have the Germans stymied here. The Italians aren't making that great a headway. And I can't really devote the rest of the Italians to the offensive particularly. I can devote more of them. So everything's in this weird kind of stasis from what the Allies are considering is we're outproducing the Japanese. If we declare war, we get rid of a certain advantage that we could get, which I don't know how big that is. There's no automatic increase here. There's only an automatic increase from Germany here. So it's not like we're going to get a bump in the production. But all the same, we've got all these resources and everything. And even if we're not strangling the Japanese and forcing them to make that surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, maybe they want to make the move first, while they have the numeric superiority. The problem there, of course, is I got this whole damn army in China and I need to win. And it keeps looking like, if I could just turn the flank, if I could just roll them, I'd force the Allies to do something. But I don't know if that's going to be the case. But indecision rules. And that's the thing. Even if you're playing, the historical whiff game, and as the Japanese, you're doing things in China, you're upping this U.S. intervention, you don't know where it is. And on the other hand, the U.S. is, maybe reluctant to actually start the war. How much are the Japanese reluctant to move, to truck? And the biggie, for me, the Marshalls, militarizing that, it's only a chip at most, but in terms of one of those. But I have almost no value to it. The only thing I get is some seagoing air that can patrol the Marshalls and, give me an advantage on moving directly on Hawaii. So that's kind of you don't really desire to do that. I got the ports here, so I can get, out to here. I can't quite make it to Mexico, but Mexico's aligned closely enough. If they're giving me the oil, I'm also saying, they'd allow port facilities there. They'd allow my military to go there, so I'm not even sure that they wouldn't allow, they would allow the convoys. So the way to do that is you land a convoy, say here in Truk, moves 1, 2, 3 to here, and then it rebases 1, 2, 3 to Mexico. So actually it is legitimate to have those convoy routes by the rules as I understand them. Whatever. To some extent fudging the rules and then trying to figure out, hey, don't they actually work correctly, is more pleasurable to me. So many ways, I just don't want to be burdened too much by the rules in a game. I want enough of it that I'm getting most of the experience out of it. And I feel like I get that here. Anyway. I guess long story short is I don't know what the hell to do with my allies. Some good weather occurred and cleared up the partisan problem in Yugoslavia. Took out the one unit I had surrounded. Was able to get enough on it for pretty much a almost guaranteed victory. I think I rolled a 1 and succeeded if I had 2 maybe, I don't know. It was a low roll. And because they're surrounded, it was a blitz result, so it gave me a B, but surrounded, that's just destroy everything. So it was good enough, but I focused everything on it. That's what I call blitz siege here. You pile everything in, you use the blitzkrieg table if you possibly can, and try to destroy things by surrounding them and hitting them hard. That meant nothing here, but I've got this headquarters cordoned off. Italians over here, interesting, sneaking their way over towards Baku and the oil up here along the Caspian Sea. That's stuff that's really hard to defend against this incursion. Up here, we had this massive and really cool air battle going on, not just there, throughout the entire Russian line, basically. You can see there are a lot less fighters, Russian fighters, but and not that many less. We killed a couple, and a couple of, there's a Finnish bomber there, but just really stretching from Finland, who's now in the war, all the way down. And even the Turks launched one and got a kill. An air superiority attack, basically the Russians had to respond to the bombings by sending some fighters up, but the Germans sent enough fighters in to have the advantage in most of the attack fights. The Russians could have kept their fighters back, probably would have been essentially the same effect, except they didn't lose their fighters then. But you know, they did prevent a couple of the bombers from getting runs through. And then over here, the Japanese launched a bunch of bombers too, both into this hex and up here. Still not getting any traction, and I'm not willing to make the low odds attacks. We saw what those did before. I don't want to flip my whole army and then get pushed back. But it's just hard judgment everywhere, you know. The one nice thing is the Chinese are kind of running low on airplanes. They're down to one effective plane left. They've got one coming in next turn, none being built here. The Americans have been building up their own forces and not trying to fight this proxy war anymore. And that means that the Chinese aren't getting quite the kind of resources they had before. That seems fine. They have a very strong line here. If it starts to crumble, I'm sure you'll start seeing U.S. resources going in there. You may also see the British starting to align themselves with the Chinese so they can start shipping stuff in too. Speaking of which, it's the Allied phase. I'm not going to likely see too much good weather in this turn. And as we roll into 42, nothing really happening in Asia, except the Russians are trying to prevent the Italians from being able to, it's not going to be easy, but some sort of strike north. Really, I'm not too worried about it because there's no supply line across here. I've got supply here because of the rail net and the cities, but without headquarters and such, I'm not going to be able to push through the desert there, so I don't know why I'm pushing there. Over here, things are kind of frozen here. The Germans took a big hit when they attacked this, but otherwise they've really kind of blasted away through these woods hexes. Swamp up here frozen over. They were able to smack that out of the way, so you can see they're making some serious gains in the north as well. And we got Swedes and Finns, I think, pushing their way through in the north there. Russia's kind of crying out and saying, dudes, I don't think I can hold out. Anyway, this is the end of the turn. Build's done. I've got all the force pool realignment work to do because it's the beginning of another year. So, you know, about an effort that would be the equivalent of, you know, what you need to set up a normal, larger game. You know, each country has a, I mean, this is France and Italy, but the larger countries have a fairly decent pool in each of these years. And there's a lot of countries in this game, especially if you count the minors, but they only have a counter or two each to add in. Anyway, let's send this up.